Hey, Nicole. Hey, Nicole.
Hi.
Yeah, it's Hector. One thing, we're gonna have to use a different link for the.
I don't.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. We're gonna have to use a different.
I need the link right now already from Catfarm Community. It's the last link, and it says it's scheduled for 10 minutes from now, like 5 minutes from now.
Yeah, but that will not work. We need to use a different one. Sadly.
I don't hear you properly.
Yeah, we need to use a different link. Hello? Yeah, we need to use a different link.
¿Todo bien?
Más o menos. Hubo un tema ahí con el
sistema.
Sí. Hey, Nicole. Okay, perfect. No, long story short, I was trying to go in time and like start streaming, but the one before it was set up to use external equipment, not my camera. And then it could not get in, so I just create a new one and I'm live now and it's working. But sorry for the last minute thing. Perfect. And I suppose if anything ask or something, you can just let them know. No, it's supposed to be live now. I'm there. It's yeah, it's saved G exactly. And you can see me? I'm live. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's the same. It's finished with CG. Huh. Can you try again? Because if it's a schedule, that's the last one. I don't know, maybe I would save something like that. Technically, it should work. Yeah, if I go in my phone and I click the new link, I enter there and I see myself. Maybe the Patreon has not been updated yet. But for sure, the good one is the one that finishes in CG.
Okay, can you check the link on WhatsApp? It's the same, I checked it. So can you click it again? Should I check this link?
Man, what a mess. Okay, yeah. Hello, everyone. How's it going? We're starting a couple of minutes. We will start. So we're going to start in 5 minutes. So please grab a coffee, get some water, and just chill. And we will start in 5 minutes. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychedelic Live chat. This is part of course, festival from the platform. My name is Hector. I will be your host right now to teach a bit of psychedelics, especially the history, how it came to be, microdosing, and alternatives. People will join in, and this is kind of weird because I cannot see you or hear you. So please go ahead and type any questions, and we just go over it. Yep. So as I mentioned, please feel free to post any questions since I cannot really hear you or see you. And my goal today is just tell the story of psychedelics, starting for what are they, why they become illegal, why they become so polemic, and to understand a bit the history, and we'll give some points into actually some proper techniques and microdosing. So let's go. First start, what are psychedelics? And actually, a good definition is psychedelic is an anti-drug. Psychedelic works in every single thing completely different from a drug. So let's define what is a drug. When we talk about drugs, the peculiarities is, it's something that we take and it does something without knowing. You take an aspirin, you don't know it, you don't allow it, but it just go and thin your blood. Similar with other drugs, let's say opioids. You take an opioid and you're gonna get relaxed and you're gonna kind of like, it's gonna be a painkiller. And most of the recreational drugs, or like let's say illegal drugs, you take them because you wanna forget. Because you wanna forget pain, you wanna have a short-term bliss or something. And in that regard, psychedelic is a completely opposite of a drug. Not only physically, but also psychologically. Because first, it does nothing to your body. It just opens your mind to enable the experience. And so therefore, it's completely dependent of what we call set and setting, what you feel, what you think in that moment. As well, in compared to other drugs, it's non-addictive and you cannot develop tolerance in the long term. So in many ways, it's an anti-drug. It behaves completely different with other drugs. And it's interesting to keep that in mind. And before we jump into psychedelics, I want to explain a little bit of like where they come from. So psychedelics, they come directly from plants. It's actually the most natural thing you can take, especially mushrooms, psilocybin. No other chemical or drug is as natural as that, because actually the compound is created by the mushroom itself and it's just given like that. So you literally just eat the mushroom, no process, no drying, nothing. It's a molecule and it was given to us. Therefore, few things are as natural or as direct. Even teas, in a tea you make an extraction. So in here is just really direct, And LSD as well come from mushrooms. Of course, LSD is the synthesized version in the lab from a mushroom. And psilocybin comes directly from mushroom. The other type of psychedelics that also come from plants, pretty much we have 4. We have psilocybin from mushrooms, LSD from mushrooms, DMT that has come from plants. It's in our body, it's in grasses, it's pretty much everywhere. It's just highly concentrated in some plants. And DMT is smoke or the active component in ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is interesting because DMT in itself, you cannot eat it. If you eat it, you digest it and it has no effect. But shamans in the Amazon realize, apparently they were told, that if they mix a certain plant in the Amazon, a certain twig, they actually inhibit the processing power of your stomach, and actually then you feel it. And the other one is mescaline, which comes from a cactus. So all of them, they're considered plant medicine. They just directly come from nature. And actually, how they come is really interesting. Because if we look at mushrooms are fascinating. They're the only species that dwells in the macro and the micro. Because in contrast with other things, mushrooms are not individuals. Mushrooms they're networks. Just to follow the cycle, if you have a mushroom, it throws a lot of spores, millions of spores. Their spores just float around. They hit into a, let's say, fertile soil, and all of them they're starting creating these mycelium thread, these microscopic white threads. But each spore is not a different organism, like plants. All of them they just combine into one. They have exactly the same DNA, and they just mix into one huge network. Once they got enough nutrients or substrate, which actually is from wood or other biomass, when they're ready, they go ahead and go from micro to macro. So they actually create a fruiting body, what is called a mushroom. And that mushroom is really kind of like a gift for the upper world. It's meant to be eaten. It's meant to throw spores. And the interesting side of psilocybin, that this was really intentional. It was kind of like just put in there to be eaten. It's so obvious that psilocybin mushrooms is the only type of mushroom that when you press it, it becomes blue. It literally changes color to make it really easy to identify that this is a psychoactive mushroom. So that's an interesting background because these things are non-addictive, no tolerance. They don't do anything to your body. They open your mind. They decondition your mind, and then you create your experience. It's what I call chemical Buddhism, because Buddhism they don't try to teach you or to force you anything. The goal is to kind of like the conditioning of yourself for you to find kind of like the inner peace. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to type. This is our first time doing a YouTube live, and it's kind of weird because it's like zero feedback, so I really don't know who I'm talking to or how it's going. So if you have any questions, please feel free to just type it in there. So to sum it up, what are psychedelics? Psychedelics in the literature are defined as molecules that affect the serotonin 2A receptors. So this really specific substance that they kind of like have like a key in a lock system, and they kind of like open or reconnect your brain. All of them come from nature, and of course they can be as well synthesized. And now the question is, why psychedelics are so polemical? Why are they illegal if they're the most natural thing, more natural than aspirin? And why, if they have like no harm, no toxicity of anything, how are they illegal? Well, they have a history. Psychedelics were discovered, let's say, on the West by two different sites. First, psychedelics, they've been used always. They've been used always from ancient times. We have records that have been used at least 5,000 years ago. In Mesoamerican cultures, such as in Mexico, they were taken regularly. And as well, we can see symbolism of many cultures. Mushrooms were used as a soma drink in Hinduism religion. And as well, we know that the Greeks, they actually used psychedelics to spike their wine. So they've been used throughout history. But let's say the modern Western approach, it came from two sides. From one side is Aldous Hoffman, when he famously discovered LSD. He was just playing around with a mushroom, with the ergot mushroom, that have some interesting properties. He was just working for a Switzerland pharmaceutical, and then he just was testing in animals, but nothing happened. Put it away, and later on, 5 years, he came back. He thought the molecule was really beautiful, and then accidentally he got something in his finger and he felt something. And then he decided to test it on himself, which he took a minuscule dose of 250 micrograms. That's a million of a gram. But as you know, that's a proper dose. That's a proper trip. He took the famous bicycle ride home from his office to his house, and then the world exploded. And they realized they stumbled into something powerful. So they created kind of like open source research. They said to a lot of people, "We found something impressive. Here's some samples. What would you do with it?" And these are in the 50s. So it was mainly used by psychiatrists, psychologists, mainly used to treat alcoholism, to treat depression. They thought they would have like a tool to go into the mind and try to cure some illnesses. So it was pure research, pure academics. And in the other side, there is this guy called Gordon Wasson, who was a banker from the U.S. Was kind of like this rich guy who got into psychedelics. He knew there were some magic mushrooms around, and he was traveling the world to try to look for them. He went many times to Asia, and then he went to Mexico. And after many trips, he get to know Maria Sabina in Mexico, Oaxaca, and he was kind of like the first Western to be invited to one of these ceremonies. And this was really secretive because the Spaniards in the colonies, in the Conquista, they completely annihilated. They really went down on psychedelics because they were trying to bring Catholicism by saying we have the blood of God and it's this piece of bread, and these guys they have what they call the flesh of the gods, something that connects you directly to the spirituality. So of course they saw it as a threat and they completely tried to punish it. So it was really secretive. Then it was published in Times that they found these magical mushrooms that they make you see visions, and then it went on and on and on. But the ones who really took it public, let's say, it was in Harvard. Now it was a lot of interest, especially from psychologists. And then in Harvard, it was up to Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. They were working with this. And Timothy Leary at the time was a really respectful and a really respected psychologist. And he took it the first time and he quoted, he said, "I learned more about psychology in these 4 hours that I have learned in my last 20 years working with this." So he completely changed gears and started developing into this. He created the Harvard Psychedelic Club. But first it was the Harvard Psilocybin Club, and it became the Harvard Psychedelic Club. And then it went just really fast. It was really new. People were talking about it. It was a lot of fear around it. Then for something silly, they got fired out of Harvard, and then they became like pirates. They became kind of like these subculture icons of liberation. And in the 60s, it was a really similar time what we're doing now. It was a lot of disparity and a lot of these issues were popping up. For the first time, it was the racial, the whole like racial talks, the feminist movement. For the first time in history, they were questioning governments. For the first time in history, it was the first war that people told them, you know what? I don't want to go to war. I'm going to question that. Because prior to this, your country goes in a war, you're 18, 20, you go. No questions asked. So people are starting to awaken with psychedelics. The hippie movement started, which started completely intellectual. Especially the two main guys were like really PhD from Harvard, you know. And of course, the government was starting to freak out a bit because there were two things that were first time in history. As I mentioned, it was the first time that a government or a war was questioned. They say, we don't believe in this, we don't want to go to war. The other thing, they were questioning values. Young people, they were saying, we don't want to join your capitalistic society. Capitalism doesn't bring you happiness, and there's more in life than to work in your corporations. And the third thing, it was a new path of initiation, rite of passage. For the first time, it was not a rite of passage made from elders to the young, but it was a rite of passage made from the youth to the youth, which the old people did not get. So of course they were fearing about this, and in that time it was a lot of control. It was a lot of control. It was not room for any other ways of seeing. But actually, ironically, they banned everything and they really pushed hard on this because it was Nixon, and they find a way. How can we make it legal? How can we really crack down in the opposition, which is kind of like this liberal left or like intellectuals for freedom fighters and the black movement. And by doing these things illegal, they were able to crack down. Another thing that it was the first time it happened in history, for the first time in science, a huge field of inquiry, a huge field of research, and a really promising field, it was just completely taken out, really like the Middle Ages. Let me point it out that even back then, LSD was showing to be the most promising cure ever tested for alcoholism, achieving 50% rate of recovery. And at that time, LSD was a miracle drug. It was international conference, was really kind of like picking up. And just like that, it was just banned. And everything went kind of like underground. And that's what it's called the first wave. But ironically, the counterculture, in a way, I wouldn't say it won, but they brought the concept of Eastern religions, yoga, peaceful movement, psychedelics pretty much kickstarted the environmental movement with the whole Earth catalog. Some guys from California, they decided to not only start Greenpeace, but to one guy in a trip say, we need to have a picture of the Earth. And they took the Earth picture and the Earth rise. And that catalyzed a lot of things and really kind of like kickstarted the environmental movement. So in a way, the counterculture was taken out by the mainstream. Back in the day, the counterculture was Rolling Stones, the Beatles, and yoga. And they were taken out, but nothing changed with the war of consciousness. Because in retrospective, it was, they were right. That war was kind of bullshit. Humans have the right and freedom to explore their own consciousness, but that kind of like remained, and it was just pushed into was just pushed on the ground. Later on, it was the second wave. Second wave happened in the 80s, and it was mainly with MDMA. MDMA, it's also considered a psychedelic, but it's not considered a classical psychedelics. Classicals are the ones that I mentioned, and there's two more, which is MDMA and ketamine. MDMA, as well, it acts differently. MDMA do has tolerance. It's not addictive, but it's a bit more addictive than psychedelics. And MDMA as well was developed by a big pharma from Germany. And then they saw it was really, really good for therapy. It allows people to kind of like release. It allows people to share and to actually share the trauma. So now it's being almost legalized for PTSD in the US. And then that pill kind of went out of the lab and become really famous in kind of like the rape scene, in the tech scene in the 80s. And this movement, it kind of pushed the gay rights movement. It brought people together to dance, to connect together, and in each wave, it pushes a lot of kind of like the social norms. So in the second wave, it was really big, especially on the gay rights and that movement. And then it became illegal again, but of course, it's not like it stopped happening. MDMA, I think, is consumed more than ever, but now it's actually being kind of like legalized. And now we're living in the third wave, what is called the psychedelic renaissance. And now it's a really interesting one because I think we went full picture and this is a full round. First, let me share the driving forces. What is driving this wave? What are the energy behind it? First, there's a huge health crisis. There's a huge, humongous mental health crisis. Everything in medicine, first, science and medicine took the diminutive and abstractive way. Let's just decompose everything in parts and understand really well its parts, and then we make progress. And they make fantastic research, fantastic advances in so many things. Just for example, eye surgery, kidneys, bones, everything in medicine advanced exponentially in the last 20 years. Nevertheless, mental health has not been advancing at all. It's actually getting even worse and worse. We live in the most peaceful, in the most abundant, and the most rich and connected time in history. Nevertheless, we have not climbed a bit in our happiness index, and we live in the most isolated and disconnected times. How? Why can we? How can it happen? So the first drive, it was a humongous mental health crisis. With no tools. Pretty much the latest tools is antidepressants. And they made a huge meta study of really the efficiency. And they realized that they don't really work. In a third, they only work kind of like in a third of the population. For 1/3, it was worse. And for almost half, it was just as placebo. But they realized how it's happening. Why we're just dosing people with these chemicals that we don't really know exactly how they work, and we only treat symptoms. And the reality is, like, Big Pharma was making a lot of money and still is, so there was no incentive for change. So you have a huge health crisis, no new tools, and kind of this understanding that say, like, we cannot keep treating depression only by its symptoms. Depression is more than that. And just to give you a perspective of how narrow-minded these things were, when psychology started, especially with Freud, everything was in the mind. Everything could be explained by traumas. Everything was in the mind. Then they got tired of it because they could not easily access it, and then they moved and they said, now everything is chemical balance. Everything's in the brain. The mind doesn't exist or doesn't really matter. So they were really in behaviorism. And we kind of like keep that trend a little bit. So they say, okay, what's depression? We cannot measure depression. So what we can measure? We can measure symptoms. Okay, so you have symptoms. How can we treat the symptoms? Okay, let's make pills for treating symptoms. And one of the ways they do for testing antidepressants, they put rats, they have 100 rats, they put it in water, and they know that exactly at 10, 15 minutes, the rat will swim, and just stop swimming and just kind of like let go and just be ready to be drowned. Then if they take them out, wash them and put it again, it might do the same for like 5 minutes. So they have a baseline. So they put half rats with nothing and half rats with antidepressants. And then if a rat swim longer, it has more willing to live, they say, okay, that's a good symptom, it's good, it's a good thing. So just imagine the short-mindedness that we were comparing the whole human experience with a willingness of a rat to keep swimming. And as well, this wave, it's really interesting because it's kind of like doing full circle and like bringing back the mind in psychology. It's bringing back kind of like this integrative research and actually going to the root cause instead of going into just symptoms. And now we're in this third wave. and how it started, why we are here, why we're now, and how big is it now. Then I think the third wave, it started completely scientifically. Well, let me pause. It always been there. It always been doing that by shamans, neo-shamans, let's say light workers, people who knew it. It always been done by people recreationally, having a good time. But it was a niche. It never went kind of like more than that. And then this guy from Oracle make a lot of money, and he knew he wanted to make a contribution. So he was actually, pulling strings, getting together, get people in this really famous center in Ashland, the US. And they got together with this really top-notch researcher called Roland Griffiths. That he was kind of like tired of science. He actually go into the meditation path. He did a lot of meditation and he was really into it, of course, asking more questions. And he was kind of like getting tired of like this science determinism and kind of like low perspective. And he was feeling alone because he could not really talk about this meditation practice with his colleagues, and he was kind of like just done with it. And then they meet and they say, you know what? There's something interesting. There's psychedelics can be the bridge between like science and spirituality. He got really into it. Long story short, he started the first paper 10 years ago in Johns Hopkins University, which was one of the leading universities in the world. And they pretty much recreated a study made by Timothy Leary in the 60s, which put to the test, can psychedelics can induce a mystical experience? Can you have a profound mystical experience, the ones only reserved for monks and clergy and a lot of meditation? Can you induce it chemically? And the answer was yes. So they did this study, really rigorous, double-sided, all of let's say golden standards of research. And they brought people in. They give a huge dose of psilocybin, blindfolded, and they got great results. I think 70% say was, I think 80% say it was one of the best experience they have ever had in comparison with, having a kid. I think 50% said it was the best experience. And they saw a lot of decrease in anxiety, depression. And they developed this kind of mystical experience questionnaire. And definitely people completely had a mystical experience. They experienced the oneness, they experienced love, and they experienced all the same attributes that let's say a monk who is meditating for 10, 20 years have this natural kind of like altered state of consciousness. And that really sparked a lot of things. That really got everyone thinking, and it changed the conversation between these line of researchers, it's impossible, you're crazy, to okay, maybe, and then start. They were doing more papers. They started to treat addiction, especially tobacco and other addictions. They have really good results. And then the ball started rolling, and it was just research, mainly in the US, some starting as well in the UK, in Imperial College London. And then I have to give it to two guys who really push for the crossover. One is Michael Pollan, who wrote an amazing book. It's called How to Change Your Mind. If you haven't read it, please do. I have been in some research and some conferences, and they really see the spike. They call it the Pollan effect. They really see the spike of interest and the spike of research after that book. He does an amazing job to tell the history of psychedelics, where they were, what they are. He just went above deep. He goes to all the researchers, interview with them, and he was telling like this is for a long time in research, it is kind of like enthusiasm of like we're doing it. It's something really impressive. We finally have new tools to learn about the mind, and we can in a way change the world. And in the book as well, he narrates his stories he goes to guides and he does a proper, psilocybin, LSD, and it's a great book. And that book, it really started kind of like moving the conversation into a general public. And him, Tim Ferriss, which is a great influential, a lot of books, a lot of podcasts, and he's been really active in this. He's been investing, he's been putting people, he's been connecting, he's having a lot of podcasts. So he's really as well, really making this, and now it's a wave. I can let you know. I opened a psychedelic center here in Amsterdam, which sadly COVID killed it. But just to give you kind of like a feeling of what's happening, science jumped already in, and especially Canada is jumping in. People make billions, or investors make billions and billions and billions with weed. Let's say it's the first time that a plant medicine it's properly commercialized and a lot of money is getting in. So people in Canada, they know this is the next thing and they don't want to be out. So we were three people startup and we're having calls from investors. So there's a lot of things, a lot of movement. It got decriminalized in Oregon State. So now it's really moving really fast. Just to give you a little bit of feedback of what's happening in science, now there's a proper center, or they accepted to make a center. So not only research, but they're actually going to build their own center for psychedelics and consciousness in Johns Hopkins University. They have a center as well in Imperial College London. They're making one in New York University. Now as well, they just announced a partnership as well, I think, for a center for University of California, San Francisco, which is a medical university, and they will like focus more in the brain and how it works and kind of like these parameters. So let's say science is full on. It already crossed the tipping point. Legal wise, Portugal is decriminalized, so it's a lot of things going up in there. It's now decriminalized in Oregon State, and now they plead cases as well in Colorado and California. So now it's really moving. And as well, sad enough, they know it's a lot of money to be made. That's why it's important, because this is not weed. This is something else. You need a framework. You need support. You need some guides. It's not a commodity, but it's the times we're living now. I think it's a crucial thing. So I'm gonna stop for a bit. If anyone has questions or anyone has something specific from the research, if anyone wants to know about which organizations are in the field a little bit, I will just pause for a minute and answer the questions. No questions, I will continue. So, I haven't introduced myself. Who I am and where I'm coming from doesn't matter. But for you to just gauge where is my background, I'm an engineer. I'm a water and environmental engineer. And I've always been an intellectually promiscuous. I have read a lot of many things. So I have kind of like this long life interest from psychology and the brain. Later on, I was really into meditation in Bana. And this kind of like this new world of spirituality opened up to me. And I was very impressed, to say the least. And as well, it was really hard to convey to people to say, hey, you should do this. It involves going silent for 10 days in a retreat, but it's life-changing. And it was really hard because people are really addicted in their own thought pattern. So it's really hard to convey that. And then I got into psychedelics and I was mind blown because I saw the convergence between kind of like science, spirituality, and the brain. And especially it kind of like this kickstart people in this spiritual practice, and then they understand mindfulness, they understand yoga, that it's not about making poses, but it's about making connection. They understand nutrition, and it's free people from the mental pattern from addiction to actually kind of like walk that path, which I found is fascinating. And just to tell about how what psychedelics actually do, it's pretty handy to understand how the brain works. If you know about machine learning or about neural networks, it's easier. It's easier way to think about it. So our brain, is the most impressive computer in the known universe, and is this humongous machine that works binary synapses, and it's a neural network. So there's a lot of layers. They get inputs, and just a machine learning, they have a lot of little gates, and they ended up in a solution. So there's so many things that you don't realize, that you're not conscious about. How you grow your hair, how you keep on breathing, a lot of things, how you react, everything. So when we are growing up, our brain, it's in exploration mode. When we're kids, are always tripping. That's why kids live in this magical world. Everything is for exploration, everything is for options, everything is just to explore. Of course, the counter side is they need to feel really safe. If they're not safe, they get scared. And of course, every time they go into a room, it's like, wow, so many things. They're in constant awe with nature and with sounds, and they're really connected in a way. Because the machine learning, the neural network, it just opens it up without needing to have a deterministic answer. It's just more for exploring all the paths. At the age of 13, 15, our brain changes from exploration to exploitation. Then we start developing these algorithms to everything kind of like condense it down and have an answer. And we develop these stereotypes or these kind of like algorithms to make things easier or effective. Therefore, every time you go into a room, you don't freak out by all the stimulus. You just know it. You see a glimpse of a tree, and your brain says it's a tree. That's it. And then you become really practical, and you can do stuff. The thing, and now in this world, that state of mind is being abused. Everything is focus, emails, blur everything out, just check, go, control. And the issue with this is sometimes these loops get stuck. Addiction is not the opposite of abstinence. The opposite of addiction is connection. Sometimes our brain gets stuck in these feedback loops. I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. So if you see the spectrum of the brain of life, on the right side we have connection. The far right is kind of like connection to oneness, Buddha, illumination, all of that. And the more we get into connection with ourselves, with our food, with our environment, then we more into that. The more we lose it, on the far end is schizophrenia, not connection with everything, not connection with reality. Then an addiction is something that we got stuck our brain that is so strong that we cannot, it takes too much energy to do something else. So when we're addicted to a substance, let's say alcohol or cigarettes, it's just too much. It just keeps this rumination thought pattern, just to seek that experience or to avoid the craving. And then you get disconnected from everything else. Nothing else matters, only that. Depression, it can be thought as an addictive thought pattern of worrying for the past. Anxiety, it can be thought of an addictive thought pattern of worrying for the future. And the more you look for fears, the more you reinforce it, your brain gets better and better and better. And it's really easy to get stuck in these patterns, the rigidity of the brain. When we go older, our brain gets more rigid and it's really hard to get our ways. So psychedelics, what it does, it connects and it opens the brain. It hyper connects the brain. Everything talks to each other. Everything kind of like hyper connects. You become a kid again. You understand the connections. You see the beauty in life. You experience this sense of awe, of awesomeness. When something is too beautiful or too much information, that you're simply instead awe. Later on, we'll talk why this makes you understand Buddhism, makes you understand art, philosophy and religion, but that's a little bit for later. And that it kind of like you break free of your negative thought patterns. You break free of that nagging voice who is telling you what to do all the time. That's why psychedelics are so powerful, because you're able to kind of like break free of that. And then first you're able to confront your fears, confront your things, confront your blockages. Whatever you have done that is not true to your true self, you can work it out in a less painful way. And then you realize that, it's stupid that you didn't talk to your mom, or all these issues. You can actually work it out. And then you get into this state of like oneness, in this perfect state of now, this perfect state of connection, that you can just meditate for hours, be kind of like one with the universe, and you get kind of like this state. Of course, you get down, and I think this is a great time to introduce one of the most important characters of this story, who is Richard Alpert. Is this Harvard PhD and professor who started the LSD revolution in the 60s. And then he was tired, not tired, but he would say, I always get down. I want to find a way to don't come down from this. So he went traveling the world, went to India, went to all monks, sadhus, everyone, just giving LSD. What is this? Tell me, how can I, where's this knowledge? And then he finally found his guru in India. And he found the ways of how can actually you can connect with this naturally, and you cannot stay in this kind of like high state of consciousness. And he created an amazing book called Be Here Now, which is really recommended. Because I truly believe psychedelics is a temporary state. We need them now because we're so disconnected. And we need them now to save the world. We need them now to wake up. But actually in the future, they won't be needed. We will be able to kind of like to connect in this kind of like connectivity practice through mindfulness, nutrition, and flow, and we'll be able to kind of like live in that state. But until now, they really need it, and they're coming. I'm gonna discuss it later about microdosing, because there's a lot of interest. Before that, I'm gonna open it up for questions. Okay, microdosing. Microdosing is getting really trendy because it's an easier way. Then I think microdosing, it opened the doors for possibilities. Before, it was thought you have to go into this super trip, going to the Amazon for an ayahuasca, having this super trip or nothing. And then it was scary, that big trip was scary, especially with no background or with no support to actually help you to integrate the experience. And microdosing is just take small doses, which have small amounts, to get ease into it. First, let me tell you what microdosing is not. Microdosing is not a pill for you to work more efficiently. It's not a hack. It's not an Adderall. Remember, psychedelics, they don't do anything for you. They only allow you the experience. And in a way, psychedelics are sacred. And why sacred? I mean, it's not about church and feathers. It's about this state or time when it's not about producing. It's not about earning. It's not about staying in the future and the past. It's this time that you're in the present and you connect and you're thankful, the way religion used to be. So microdosing is not to work efficiently. Actually, doesn't really work that much for that. But microdosing is this an amazing practice of being able to use psychedelics in all their spectrum. So microdosing with LSD or mushroom is just taking a bit. It can be so perceptual that you would barely feel it. if let's say let's talk numbers. Usually for mushroom, let's talk about dry. 1 gram of mushrooms dry, it's a hit or a trip. And that time you want to be in a safe spot. And let's say 3 to 4, it's a normal heavy hit, and 4 up is a heroic dose. There you need to be in a safe spot for a long time, and really you need to take the time to do it, and afterwards to integrate it. Where LSD is about, let's say, 100 micrograms. It's where it's called a dose. A heavy dose is 200 to 300, and 400 up is a micro dose. It's a heroic journey. Microdose, I would say, is everything in between LSD from 5 to 50, and mushrooms from 0.05 to 0.5. Talking about LSD, so in 10 to 10 micrograms, let's say a 20 or a 10 of a dose, it's so perceptible. You won't even notice. You might be working and you will not notice, but when you stop, you will say like, you know what? I was more creative. I was taking more time for the bigger picture. And maybe you were a little bit more attentive to, to the clouds around you, that kind of thing. At 15, 20, at that point, you are perfectly fine. You can talk, you can do everything. But at that point, you don't want to work. You don't want to send emails anymore. You want to look at art. So if you're microdosing for work and you overdose a bit, it's gonna be awkward, because you will not want to have you won't want to have meetings, especially language gets funny. It seems harder to get the words, and it's really hard to explain what's on your mind, because psychedelics connects you to your heart instead of only in the brain. So it's hard to translate into words. And then 0.25, a quarter, is called the party hit, when you can go to a party and be amazing and not have to drink. And 0.5 or 50 micrograms, it's you're in between. Definitely you see visuals, it's pretty fun, but you can, let's say, if you're experienced, you can control. You can go to a museum, and then it's your practice. So microdosing is amazing. If you want to go in a weekend for a hike, you can take a microdose, and then you can really connect, be in nature, be present, have these senses. Actually, microdosing and going to a museum is just beautiful. You're in this perfect state of mind where you're not tired, you're really connected, you can really see the art through, and you're not bothered, you're not hungry, you're really just there. So I really invite you to have a microdosing practice, which is not a hack to work more efficient. It's just to expand the possibilities of psychedelics and bring it into your everyday life for connection. And of course, it's really important at every dose to consider the 4 S's. First is substance. What are you taking and which dose? Is it good? Is it proper? Is it well sourced? And which dose? That's really critical. Then is setting. Where is your setting? You really need to work on your setting, because it really influences you. You don't want to have microdosing and be with people and everything. Remember, you become a kid. The more you do it, the more of a kid. So for the higher doses, you need to think, is the setting is good enough for a 5-year-old to be here for X amount of hours? Would you put a 5-year-old in the middle of a crowd? No, he will freak out. So you need to have a setting that is conducive for the experience. And the other one is setting, which is the mindset. Are you comfortable? Are you okay? What are you thinking? What's your intention? It's super important. And the proper set for this is to let go and surrender. I tell to people, the perfect set of this is like savasana in yoga, when you do the work and it's just time to let go and surrender. That is, you took your time, you put the work, you plan it out. This is your time. You have no phones. You will be uninterrupted for 8, 12 hours. And it's time for you to nurture, to regrow, recreate it, and later on to integrate it. I'm developing kind of like a license because I believe this is on a spectrum. And I think I compare psychedelics to scuba diving, which I think is beautiful. Take it to a different world. It's really safe. But if you do it wrong and you panic, you fuck it up. Therefore, there are levels. First is discovery dive. You take small dose in a certain setting, certain music, and then when you pass that, you can go to an open water dive, and there's kind of like a structure manual of what to do, which music, which checklist, how to plan it, how to put your setting and intention, and then you move it up into the steps and into you get to the last stage, which is level 42. I can, if you reach out, I can send it to you guys. And for that, I want to thank you all for being here and to join us in this new experience of YouTube Live, which is kind of weird. But yeah, so I want to wish you the best, safe journeys, heal, play, love, and use psychedelics in the right way. We cannot afford to be used in the wrong way and give it a bad name or make it a stupidity. So please do it with respect. They're sacred. And really have a good intention and take the time and do it properly. And please, yeah, enjoy.